So I just have some questions I want to ask you and kind of get to know you better and have the hearers or readers get to know you better as well. So one thing I wanted to ask is just tell us a little bit what you're doing, about yourself, your family, and some of your passions.
Yeah, sure. My wife, Adrienne, and I have been married for 18 years, and we have a 10-year-old little girl named Abigail. And for the last 14 years, we've been in Western Pennsylvania with a heart to start out planting churches is what we thought we were supposed to do. But as we were following Jesus and seeing how things unfolded, recognized there is really a heart in us to make disciples and then really grow intentionally, like the way that we were going to build church, not be around our vision. We try to build it in a way of a lifestyle that was really rooted in the way that Jesus actually lived. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it makes sense or not, but like for me, I had spent the first part of my ministry trying to build around vision, and I'd become very vision-centered. I recognized a lot of good things happened there, and we had to see Jesus do a lot of good stuff in the midst of that. But our lives themselves had started to drift to where we were really living to pursue what we had in mind instead of the simple things of following Jesus every day. So for the last 7 years, we lived in Grove City, Pennsylvania, and have been a part of planting a church here that is really focused on growing disciples intentionally through relationship and understanding that will mean that certain ways that we used to measure success aren't going to be the ways that we can do that now. But it's been just amazing and most fruitful time of our lives in ministry to watch people grow up in Jesus and then to see them start making disciples and just see the love of God begin to affect people's lives at a level that goes beyond what we used to see, and we would just have a Sunday meeting to really call people to follow Jesus together and watch how that brings transformations to families and neighborhoods and help people's dreams come alive in a different way whenever they know who they are and they know that there's this love that they get to live in forever. So we find that in Jesus, and that's the culture of that's the culture that we're after. So I think I'm passionate about that, but also that's also meant that a lot of other cool things have opened up with the people we follow Jesus with. I get to spend my life investing into a lot of young leaders who have a heart to change the world, and those who gravitate around typically not necessarily looking to do that through professional ministry. We have some that do that, but most of them are people who want to follow Jesus into business or entertainment or education. Yeah. And so just helping them get launched. And so what they're doing and working with other people who have the same heart to see people succeed and make an impact for the kingdom.
That's so cool. So really influencing those in different spheres and mountains.
Yes, I think recognizing that call on the church, just to not just be influential within a Christian subculture, but to really see what can we do as we follow Jesus and see the kingdom come that influences the way that marriages are forming and businesses are operating and people are learning, and to see that the good news of Jesus has an impact on all of that.
Yeah.
It's way better than what I first thought when I signed up. So it's just awesome to watch God transform people.
That's so cool. Wow. That's powerful. It's really powerful. What are some Christian leaders that you have been inspired by?
That's a good question. That's a funny question. Well, I feel like there's a couple mentors specifically that really encouraged me. I got to meet a guy by the name of Floyd McClung, who had been with YWAM for many years and then started this thing called All Nations. And Floyd he's been an author and a church planter, and when I met him, I felt like it was really good for us because we were trying to figure out how we take this message of the gospel and live it out a way that looks simple. And he and his wife Sally had been doing that for decades by the time that we met them. And so it was like that was the function that God had connected us with. And then we also got to meet people through Bethel, and became friends with some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the around the same time that we were getting to know Floyd, and so the message they carried to see the kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, that was like the fuel. It was like here's the fuel. But we knew that what we were supposed to do didn't look like building something that looked just like Bethel.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool how in relationships we had with mentors here in our region, a great spiritual dad, by the name of Jim Erb, who was a pioneer back in the Jesus movement in our region. As we were walking together, it just was really cool to see these influences that God was bringing us into relationship with. How there was both a provision for this message that made our heart come alive, and also a way of living it out that was faithful to the DNA that God had put inside of our hearts.
Yeah.
So I think, so Floyd and then like the Bethel influence.
Yeah.
So those were the
That's so cool.
places. And then meeting people along the way, it's just awesome to see how God always brings us into connections with people and with leaders that, further the forming of Christ in us.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that, it's a lot of ministries tend to want to copy other ministries and like, well, they're doing it right. They're causing influence. So let's just kind of mimic that. But I love what you're like, well, we're taking something here, but we're going to be our own DNA, what God has put in us, and we're going to run. And that's so powerful because that's what, God created us all different, and He put something in our heart, and that's how we need to express it, and not to, copycat people, but to run with the vision God has placed, the DNA He's placed in you. So that's so powerful.
Yeah, I think that's really like a big part of what I have learned in this journey is that when I was trying, I remember when we first met Randy Clark, and Randy had invested a lot of resources in us, and he sent interns to come and work with us as we were planting a tiny little church at the time. But Randy encouraged us different places that we could connect. And it was so important that we're asking questions like, hey, how can we plant a church and see like kingdom DNA in it? But he really encouraged us to make sure that we were being ourselves and not like just adopt somebody else's who God made them to be.
Yeah.
And so I know one of the things that it seems like people have connected to most with what we've communicated from Culture this year is the world's not looking for the next Billy Graham. It's not looking for the next Jesus culture. It's looking for you. It's looking for sons and daughters to grow up and be who God made them to be. And I see so many times where it's almost like the people surrender what God's created them to be to try to fit that image of what they've been influenced by. So just encouraging people to be able to follow Jesus and dream dreams that are uniquely created for their hearts.
Exactly.
And then, watch what God does. And that's amazing because that really brings honor, right? That brings honor to these other influences because it takes, I just think about some of the friends I have in ministry who do have large platforms, and just the consistency I hear in them, of building what's in front of, the importance of us to build what's in front of us and not try to be something else. Because it honors the deposit of those who've gone before us when we take what they've invested in us and we become faithful with it.
Yeah.
And, so I'm really thankful. I'm really thankful for relationships, both here within our region and then just across the body that have encouraged us to be able to be who God, made us to be, but also in that, really to empower these young leaders we're connected with to really stretch that and to say, what's God put inside of your heart, and how can you be faithful with that? And then to watch how God takes and breathes on that and multiplies it. It's beautiful. He loves taking our little sack lunch and feeding a multitude. And that never happens when we're trying to trade in our lunch for someone else's. But when we take what we have and give it to him.
Wow, so good. So good. Come on. So what I want to know is, what books have you read that have really influenced you? So besides Leaders, what books have impacted you?
All right, top of my head, Red Moon Rising by T. Gregg was a big influence because it was a story of what was God doing in this generation. It had some cool learning teaching directives in it, but lots of stories. And I found myself reading that book over and over again because it was like I was homesick for seeing God move in this generation. Mm-hmm. So that's one. You See Bones, I See an Army by Floyd McClung. That was good. I love reading things by people that I love.
Yeah.
I love hearing it in their voice. So it's just big books by people that we know. But that book was a real call for the church to, one of the things Floyd says in that book is that every generation is given the commission of dreaming what the New Testament teaches of church. What does it look like in my generation? So that was a really influential book. When Heaven Invades Earth by Bill Johnson. I feel like at the time that we read that book, we were early on in our journey of following Jesus and church planting, and just so much of what we'd been reading in scriptures, to hear somebody else put into words, it was super encouraging and gave us fuel for the journey. And then I think the other one that I remember was a real impact to us was the Shaping of Things to Come by Alan Hirsch and Michael Frost. That book, it's not like it captured everything that was in our DNA, but as we started trying to live the church out in the ways that we felt like God was leading us, it was a good look at other people who were doing something similar. And again, it wasn't exact, but it was just like an encouragement that what we were sensing God leading, and as we read the scriptures and tried to figure out how we live that out now, but there were other people asking those same questions and taking courageous leaps of faith to see the church look, something that lines up with the New Testament. So that was encouraging.
That's good. I just finished reading Culture of the Few, and I have to say, and I wrote this in my review, that it really impacted me, and it was really a confirmation from the things God has planted in my heart to realize, we get this big idea and we forget to focus on the little things, the simple stuff, and how it has such a lasting impact. And I can see from what you have written that God is really taking you on this journey and giving you revelation. But what was the key element that got you to be inspired to write this book?
I think the key for me, as far as the inspiration to write, was recognizing a responsibility to chronicle the journey that we were going on for people who were going to journey with us later on. I really struggled in writing because I always feel like it's someone who always wants to be learning. It seems like as soon as you start to write something down, you're saying, we've come to a conclusion on this. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like the Lord was inviting me to write this book, and it took a long time to get started just because thinking, there's surely something more valuable I can do with my time. But then one of our spiritual sons had a frank conversation with me and looked at me and said, hey, we need you to be faithful and chronicle this so that we can learn from the places you've learned. And all of a sudden, then it became relational. And then doing it wasn't about writing some epic book that, was my masterpiece, but it was about building into relationships and leaving something for people who were going to come behind, hopefully a place that would help them start out with a better starting point, and everything that we had learned would become fuel for their journey, I really passionately believe that every generation is going to have obstacles to deal with, but we don't want, I don't want my daughter to have to deal with the same stumps and the same obstacles that are in the road that we've dealt with. I want to make sure we're faithful to clear the ground and give her momentum as she, walks and grows. And so we feel that for our daughter. We feel that for our spiritual family as well. So I think that was the main spark for why we felt like it was important, why I felt like it was important, why our family sacrificed to do that.
Yeah.
And then I think that also the issue of identity being such a important part of understanding that, and I guess like a foundational piece in the book, but understanding that, knowing that so many world changers that we would meet, these amazing young men and women who had visions of doing something great for God, but they would just miss that one piece about identity.
Yeah.
And so they're always trying to do something so they could become someone, and then that would really be what it meant to do something for Jesus, is when they could accomplish something. And I think wanting to see people walk in that freedom was also another big motivator for saying we need to finish this, and then put it into God's hands and trust that He's going to connect it and make it be a resource for the right people.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. One thing I love that you did is that you kind of sandwiched your book from, like, one piece of bread was identity, and then having the last piece being intimacy. And I really felt like you hit it on the head, because there is so many teachings on identity, but identity without intimacy is not good, Like, you need to have relationship. And I thought it was so clever, because so many times I've seen in books where intimacy is like right in the beginning, and by the time you finish reading, you kind of forget about it. You're like, oh yeah, that chapter, that was good. And here you kind of go like, hey, you need to know who you are. And then at the end, just even if you do know who you are, you need to be connected to Him. Like, that is the key. Yeah. And so I thought that was such a powerful way that the book was formatted to really get people thinking, like, yes, identity is super duper important, but intimacy too. Like, those need to be, that's what holds the sandwich together, those two pieces of bread. If you're missing that, you're not going to be able to hold in the substance in the middle. So I thought that was super clever.
Well, I think it's important that in the teaching of identity, I don't think I can overestimate how important it is. At the same time, the place that the enemy would want to distort that is just like by creating a spoiled mentality where, we all know that we're sons and daughters and we have access to God, and it's not about our performance. And so it's easy for that to produce almost a sense of laziness and complacency in us. And so the idea that identity gives us access to what intimacy brings us into is really important. That, we understand that, we have access to the Father's table. We have access to the very throne room of God. But if we're not finding ourselves living there, if we're not finding ourselves accessing that place with the Father and creating that desire to grow more in a relationship with Jesus, then it's almost a waste of our identity. Yeah. And those things can get twisted, but I think just the heart. So the picture that I had whenever I was laying out the book was the idea of closing the circuit. That we don't want to just be okay with the fact that we have a key to the house, but never visit. We want to regularly find ourselves in a place of intimacy with God, because we know who we are, because we know that we were created. We were created for His presence, and we have a really good Dad who loves to welcome us to His throne room.
So good. So you have 5 sections in this book. What were some of the harder ones to write, and what were some of the easier ones to write? Just as a writer, where was that processing for you?
So I think as a writer, intercession was both the hardest one, because I think there's so much teaching on intercession that felt pretty different than what I was sensing that I should write about. But it was the hardest one, but I felt like it was the most rewarding for me personally, because as I was writing it and really just getting into the Word on that section, it was I just was blown away by the faithfulness of God. And I think one of the things just to mention is this, the connection between intercession and intimacy. How about, not wanting those to be seen as two completely disconnected things, but to be able to see them distinctly, that, in intimacy, we're seeing the Father, the joy of seeing His face and being with Him. But in intercession, when we have that kind of a heart posture, we get to see with the Father. And to go through and, to study that out and see exactly just how, I think, biblically accurate that viewpoint is, it just changes. A lot of people say that it changes their view of what intercession looks like. I think sometimes intercession can only feel like warfare or something that's super heavy, and there's not aspects of prayer that don't take on those elements. But when we learn to see with the Father and see what He's seeing, which is how Jesus lived His life, is by seeing what the Father is doing. Mm-hmm. You just see so much hope flood seemingly hopeless situations. Yeah. So I think that was both the hardest and most rewarding. I think that the section on invitation is probably the one the Lord had been working in me the longest, and so that maybe the easiest, because I felt like there were so many great stories that I wanted to include that we had to cut out, and so. But I think that was just from a place of that's probably the one that we've been practicing the longest. Yeah.
Wow, that's really good. What do you think are some of the areas Christians tend to struggle with when it comes to grasping the overall truth that you laid out in the book? Like, where do you see some of, the up-and-coming, young Christians or even mature Christians where they tend to go, have a problem with, that's hard, because it is. You're messing with a lot of mindsets that were like, bigger is better, make it fancy, or, you want it to be grand, or you want to go to the nations, go, and you neglect your hometown. So what are some of those tendencies that Christians will struggle with?
Well, I want to address what you just talked about. Before I do, I want to make very, very clear, it's not that bigger is not good. Yeah. Or that, and it's saying that it's not always better. It's not saying that it's bad. It's definitely, recognizing that there's some people that just, kind of can get a chip on their shoulder and, almost have this place where if it's gotten too big or, God doesn't work that way. And that would just be equally as messed up. Exactly. To put God in a box that way. But I think that to answer the question that you asked, I think it's really dangerous when we have this idea of what success looks like that often can look so differently from the way that Jesus actually lived His life. Mm-hmm. And so when that happens, then we always find ourselves disappointed because we're always chasing something that we're not to yet. And so I really, in wanting to see people grasp the significance of learning to live as sons and daughters, it's not that we ever want to dial back the dream in our heart or reduce our vision to something that's more manageable. Mm-hmm. It's always about letting what God has put inside of us fully develop and get healthy. And know that, it's interesting. Some of the people that I know that I feel like lead ministries that people always want to copy, they don't know the journey that those leaders went through. Yeah. To go to where they've gone. They don't know, the process. And I just remember talking with one friend, people always want what we've got, but they don't know the story of, how we got there. So it's really easy to miss out on the fact that God loves us too much to skip this journey that we're on. I remember talking to this young leader. He was so ready to go, he was charging hell with the water pistols. He was doing everything you can imagine. He was, dreaming of filling stadiums. And it's those things are not bad at all. Mm-hmm. A really good ambitions. But it was he got this in his heart, and he was ready to do it tomorrow. And, I just asked him, I said, hey, what are your favorite characters in the Bible? And he started just naming off, these people from Scripture you looked at, and every one of them, there was a process they walked through. It's not because God wasn't able to do something different, but God loves us too much. Yeah. just to allow us to skip into what we think success looks like.
Yeah.
Without growing in who He's made us to be. And so I think that the danger that, like, I hope the book addresses is following a fantasy of what changing the world can look like, following a fantasy of, like, what, ministry should be, instead of following Jesus. And for me to be able to look across the spectrum of my relationships and see that there are people I know who love Jesus, and what it looks like for them to follow Jesus is going into the rough inner city neighborhoods in someplace like Detroit and getting a job that's below their education, but they're in a job in a neighborhood because God's called them there, and they're loving people, and they're making disciples, and they're seeing the supernatural happen in the midst of poverty. And then, for other people that know what it looks like, it's going to be up every night in front of thousands of people and a concert, and they're getting a chance to bring the light of God into a dark place. And to know it's not following Jesus doesn't look like one or the other.
Yeah.
It's understanding who God made us to be and finding that, because I just carry this conviction that the world is not waiting on the next great speaker. The world is waiting on sons and daughters to know who they are.
Come on.
And be who God made them to be. And so this picture of, this big curtain rising up on the sons and daughters of God, and really revealing to the world His majesty and His glory and His image uniquely expressed in us. I just think that that's such a more beautiful picture that if everyone has to look like exactly the same expression.
Exactly.
And it just devalues like the heart of God, I think, when we make it. It can only look this way. So it's not always big. It's not always little. It's God showing Himself, through those who allow themselves to be, earthen vessels where glory shines out.
Come on. Just following Jesus and what He wants to do for you. Like, it makes me think of what Banning said in a post that he had about, it's not really about following the dream. It's about following Jesus. And wherever happens with that, if it's a stadium, it's a stadium. If it's just the person down the street here, it's down, just follow Jesus. And so... And understanding, I think, that a lot of times those dreams that we have in our heart, those dreams are the fruit of us following Jesus. Yeah.
And I think that sometimes what I've encouraged people who have stadium dreams is to be faithful where they're at, instead of waiting for, a stadium to come to them, but be faithful where they're at, and be faithful. I always want to encourage people to the nation, but I want to encourage them to their neighbors as they're going to the nation.
Come on,
so,
yeah.
And just seeing that it doesn't have to be, one or the other. And seeing, I remember I was having a conversation with Banning one time, and he was asking me about what we had learned in the process of planting something here, like locally, instead of just building and training and doing things I used to do. And I was just like, man, it's slow. It's slower than I could have anticipated. But to see the gospel work in a group of people in a city, like for me to watch how God is changing and transforming lives, it's so, like, I wouldn't trade where I'm at now for where I used to be at.
Yeah.
But I know that God may not always have me doing what I'm doing right now. And so there may be a time where that next step looks different. So I don't want to become addicted to the expression of what following Jesus looks like. I want to be like that woman who is just reaching out for the hem of His garment. I just want to grab on and hold on for dear life and just say, I'll go wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
And I think that commitment to Jesus over our fantasy and what it looks like to follow Him, I think it is essential in being able to have that ongoing, sustaining place of, like, impacting the world. Because it's very easy for me to get caught into the routine, and I've lost the hold of Jesus. And Jesus is the one that changes people's lives. It's not my story. It's not my vision. It's the power of the gospel about who Jesus is that changes people. And to be able to watch that happen, we were made to see that happen. We were made to see the gospel work. Jesus, His message was, the kingdom of God is here. Repent and believe this good news. And I find that when I'm following Him, whether it's seeing God work in, a single mom's life who is just desperate and doesn't even know the right questions to ask. Or whether it's seeing him work from a platform and seeing hundreds of people get touched by God. Like, I was made to see the good news of Jesus work, and so I just never want to get addicted to an expression of what that looks like that replaces the intimacy of doing it with him. Come
on, that's so good. Wow. That will let you know, that's something you would chew on for a while, because it's so important. We get, I don't know, as a minister and who's been in ministry for a long time, you get so caught up sometimes in the doing, and this is what it looks like, and this is what we're going for, and just to kind of take a step back and be like, it's all about Jesus, going after him, and if he wants to change something, he can change something. If he wants me to go this way, I'm going to go this way. But just being faithful to him and your relationship with him. It's so powerful what you're saying. Like, I really do believe this is something the church needs to grasp onto and to really see influence and change in all spheres, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So good.
Absolutely. Well, that's the prayer, is that, you know, as we can find ourselves looking to Jesus. I love Hebrews, chapter 12, looking to Jesus, the author and the finisher. And I just recognize there's just a Brad-centered life is just not worth living.
Yeah.
But if I can get my eyes on him and just keep him at the center of it, and whenever I start to lose sight, be surrounded by people who are going to help me look back at him.
Yeah.
So that's I'm looking for bored people, because I got a whole new way of life like this. But you find the people who are bored and just introduce them to what looking at Jesus looks like.
Come on.
It's just amazing, and it's awesome to see how God's using even the pointing to Jesus to encourage people to wake up maybe in areas where we've kind of fallen asleep. And sometimes I'll get asked to speak places, and I'll talk at first. Say, hey, is there anything you want me to share on? They would talk about hey, let's talk about a Jesus-centered Christianity. At first I'm thinking what are you talking about? How can we have any other kind? But just recognizing in my own life, it's easy to get caught up in emotions, even good ones.
Yeah.
But just saying, hey, we're not going to settle for that. We really want to find our life by setting him always before us.
So good. Come on. That's truth right there.
Come on.
So with our giveaway that we're hosting, it comes with a workbook. Can you kind of tell us a little bit how that workbook's going to connect with the book and what readers can experience with that workbook?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the workbook is specifically designed to help walk people through the paradigm shifts that are covered in the culture this view. So it's laid out, it follows the pattern of the book, but it's ideally worked out with a few other people. I think it could work for small groups for a church, but really if someone said, hey, I want to follow Jesus, I'm going to grab a couple of friends and we're going to walk through this, it's really laid out to help us to reflect on, hey, what is it we're already thinking about, say, about identity? What is it I'm already thinking about identity? And then we just have this section where we're just discovering what does God say about it, and then we're looking for places to shift our ways of thinking into alignment with God's thoughts. And so for our church community here in Grove City, for the last, since November, so we're 7-8 months into it now, we've been praying a prayer of God, what are the areas where I'm thinking about me that are not what you're thinking about me? What are the areas where I'm thinking thoughts about you that are not what you're thinking about you? And God, bring us to a place where I'm in agreement with what you're thinking. And so in each one of these sections of the book, we're just looking for, in a chapter, redefining success. I wrote the book, and as I'm working through the workbook, I'm like, wow, there's areas where my idea of what I'm shooting for is different than what I can see laid out in the life of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so the book has really helped us facilitate and bring some real practical understanding to, I think, these paradigm shifts, because all of us have read good books and got to the end and saying, now what?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are people who will read my book and feel the same way. And the workbook is designed to help facilitate and integrate these truths that we're talking about. And let's begin to see how can we work these into our everyday lives. And we just encourage people to take their time on the workbook. Don't be in a rush to get through it. There's not right answers if you can fill in the blanks. They're really questions designed to help you discover what do you believe about these things, and then how you can come in just to alignment of what God has to say.
That's good. It's really good. Do we have any future projects or books in the horizon, or is this going to be a focus for a while?
I think this will be a focus for a while. We are working on something I'm excited about. We already started working on an outline for a book that really deals with some of, I think, the practicals of disciple making. Mm-hmm. So the culture of the few really calls attention to people who want to change the world. What does it look like to examine the life of Jesus to find out what his definition was for changing the world? But we have a book that we've been working on that deals with, how do you find your few? How do you begin to build long-lasting relationships with people in the midst of a society that's changed? There's a lot of change. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
But for right now, we're focused on trying to communicate what's in this book. And then I think that the active projects we're working on right now is we have a heart to take and develop additional digital resources. So we have blog posts and
awesome.
videos that we're putting together, every month, resource packs that deal with some of the practicals that are covered in the book. Right now we're working on one on leadership development and how easy it is sometimes, and knowing we need to develop leaders, how we can sometimes recruit people to fulfill our vision instead of following Jesus and loving people and pulling out the greatness that God put inside of them. So the projects we're working right now are more like micro projects, but as we see it, where Jesus leads, we're working toward the next writing project, but I think we'll complement this.
Awesome. That's so exciting to hear about. And just that the things you're building with Culture of the Few and the new ones coming in the future. So, Brad, that's about it on my questions here. Is there anything you would like to leave with the readers or people who are interested in your book?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just thank you so much for taking the time to review the book and to make this available to people you're connected with and to your audience. The biggest encouragement I would have for people who are considering reading the book is that there really is something to find as we turn our attention and turn our affection to the life of Jesus. It's not just a Sunday school answer. But there's something in the way that he lived 2,000 years ago and that he lives now that the world is hungry for. It would be a big mistake to look at our culture and to think that the culture at large is not interested in Jesus. They are hungering and they are thirsting and they are crying out for what's real. And if anything, I hope that the Culture of the Few does. Originally, I wrote the book mostly for, like our spiritual sons and daughters in that generation. But finding a lot of leaders who've been in ministry for 30, 40 years saying to me, like, hey, well, somehow we lost the plot. We started out with this idea of following Jesus, and somehow we just got busy doing stuff. And so to be able to know that the hope that the world hungers for doesn't lie in our strategic plan. It doesn't lie in our ability to be great communicators. It really, the hope is for the world, and we get out of the way and let people see Jesus. And so I would just encourage anyone who has a desire to follow Jesus and change the world, come into this journey. The things that we lay out, they're not a checklist. They're not something that you can just go through. It's not a program. But it's just looking at 5 areas in the life of Jesus where we can follow him into these areas and believe that as we do that, he's going to show up. And like I said before, he's going to multiply the little sack lunch that we have, and he's going to make a feast of himself for people around us to be able to taste of. And that, the power of what happens when an individual's life is transformed and then a family's life is transformed, cultural transformation won't come because everybody gets it all at once. It will become because Jesus is changing people's lives, just like he did with the woman at the well. Yeah. He has an encounter with this woman, and she goes and she tells everyone, and the whole town ends up coming to Jesus because of it. And so that's what we're believing for in faith, is to see people being able to see the life of Jesus, follow Jesus, and as they do, people are going to get impacted by it, and individuals be transformed. We do. I don't think it's a pipe dream to see cities and nations transformed by the love of God through the person of Jesus. So come for the journey. Check it out at culturethefew.com.
Awesome. Come on. That's great. Well, Brad, thank you so much. You gave definitely a lot of us to chew on stuff as they listen and read this interview. So I'm super stoked that we're doing this giveaway because I really feel it's going to bless some people.
That's awesome. Thank you again so much. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, you too, Brad, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
God bless.